The year is 1912. The United States was on the precipice of vast technological and social change, yet in the heartland, the rhythm of life remained rooted in tradition and quiet trust. Villisca, Iowa, was a town defined by its stability, a place where the doors of homes were rarely locked, where neighbor knew neighbor, and safety was an unspoken certainty. But certainty is often fragile. On a warm summer night, the shield of community trust was utterly shattered.
Every mystery has a story, but not every story has an answer. Every week, we uncover the chilling cases that have haunted investigators for years. Unsolved disappearances, cold cases, and the darkest secrets waiting to be discovered. Are you ready to uncover the truth? Join us, if you dare. The Unsolved Chronicle.
In the early hours of June 10, 1912, 8 people, 6 family members and 2 young guests, were systematically slain within the home of Josiah and Sarah Moore. The act was swift, brutal, and utterly baffling in its execution. The investigators who first entered the house encountered a scene that seemed staged for an audience of one. Windows were meticulously covered. Mirrors were draped with cloths. The lamp was found with its wick turned down low, suggesting the killer preferred the absolute dark for their grim work. The weapon, an axe taken from the Moore's own barn, was left behind, resting against a wall. The killer spent what seemed like hours inside the house after the crime. Was this done out of necessity, or was it a horrifying ritual? Why was the motive so obscure? There was no theft, no visible sign of sexual violence, and no forced entry. This was not the chaotic fury of a robbery gone wrong. This was an act of profound, cold-blooded methodology executed in a house where 8 souls slept. The culprit, seemingly swallowed by the quiet prairie night, left behind a legacy of terror, the oldest, most frustrating cold case in Iowa history. A crime committed in plain sight, yet forever obscured by shadow. The Moore family were pillars of their community. Josiah B. Moore, 43, was a prosperous hardware businessman. His wife, Sarah Montgomery Moore, 39, was deeply involved in church life. They raised 4 children, Herman, 11, Catherine, 9, Boyd, 7, and Paul, 5. The family lived in a modest, 2-story frame house typical of the era. The last known moments. The tragedy unfolded on Sunday, June 9, 1912. It was Children's Day at the Presbyterian Church. The Moore children were joined by their neighbors, Lena Stillinger, 12, and her sister Ina, 8, who had been invited to stay the night. The entire party attended the evening program. Josiah and Sarah, along with the 6 children, walked home around 9:30 p.m. Witnesses noted nothing unusual during the walk. Neighbors reported seeing the lights in the Moore house extinguished shortly after 10 p.m., confirming the family had retired for the evening. On Monday, June 10, the town noted the inexplicable silence emanating from the Moore house. Mary Peckham, a neighbor, grew concerned when the house remained shuttered long after the usual hour. The chimney was cold, and the morning chores were untouched. By 7:30 a.m., she called Josiah's brother, Montgomery Moore. Moore arrived and found all shades drawn and the doors locked. He tried his key on the front door, but found that though the lock turned, the door wouldn't open. It was secured by an interior hook and eye latch. Mont, sensing immediate danger, forced the door open and sent for City Marshal Hank Horton. Marshal Horton entered the house and found the immediate details confounding. Downstairs, in the guest bedroom, lay the bodies of the Stillinger sisters. Upstairs, in the larger bedrooms, were Josiah and Sarah, and their 4 children. The weapon used, an axe from the Moore family's own barn, was discovered leaning against a wall in the downstairs bedroom. The sheer force and efficiency of the attack suggested a focused, determined killer. Yet, the forensic evidence, or the lack thereof, was the most enduring mystery. Investigators confirmed several key, bizarre details at the crime scene. Concealment, every single window shade was drawn tightly, and in some rooms, the windows were covered with clothing or pieces of fabric. All mirrors were draped with towels or skirts. Internal security: all exterior doors, save for the one forced by Montmore, were locked from the inside. The key to the back door was missing from its usual spot. The artifacts: a piece of bacon was found beside the axe, wrapped in a towel, and a pan of bloody water was found on the kitchen table, suggesting the killer had attempted to clean themselves or the weapon. The lamp, a kerosene lamp, belonging to the family, was found on the kitchen floor. The wick had been turned down so low that it would have sputtered out soon after, plunging the kitchen into darkness. The total lack of defense wounds and the discovery that the perpetrator had used a household object for the weapon immediately pointed away from a professional killer and toward either a spontaneous, personal attack or a highly controlled, deeply disturbed mind. Crucially, the early investigation was chaotic. Within hours, hundreds of curious onlookers and journalists trampled the scene, compromising virtually all potential trace evidence. Local authorities lacked the expertise to secure a crime of this magnitude, and their subsequent official statements failed to quell the burgeoning national fear that an unknown monster walked among them. The fact that nothing was stolen cemented the dreadful conclusion: this was not murder for profit, but murder for its own sake. The failure to solve the Villisca murders led to an explosion of suspicion, directed both locally and toward the unknown transients who crisscrossed the Midwest. The lack of clear motive and the perplexing staging of the crime scene allowed three core theories to take hold, each pointing to a vastly different killer. Theory 1: the itinerant serial killer. This theory suggests that the murders were the work of a transient serial killer, likely traveling by railroad, who paused in Villisca only long enough to commit the crime before moving on. This hypothesis gained traction because several similar, unsolved axe murders occurred in the preceding year across the Midwest, in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Paola, Kansas, among others. These crimes shared striking similarities: the use of an axe left at the scene, the covering of victims' heads or faces, and the attack on multiple family members, often occurring near major rail lines. One prominent focus of this theory was William Mansfield, an itinerant worker later suspected in several of these killings. Some investigators believe Mansfield was a professional murderer or a deeply disturbed drifter, whose disciplined technique allowed him to operate without leaving forensic traces. His skill at wiping down the weapon and locking the doors internally, a hallmark of his suggested pattern, is cited as circumstantial evidence. The supporting evidence is primarily pattern recognition across states, suggesting a traveling predator. The contradiction, however, is the difficulty in definitively placing Mansfield in Villisca on that specific night. Furthermore, while the general methodology seems similar, local authorities resisted linking the Villisca crime to distant murders, preferring to seek a local solution. Nevertheless, the efficiency of the killing and the killer's ability to vanish without a trace strongly support the notion of an organized, non-local perpetrator. Theory 2: the local vendetta. A persistent theory maintains that the Villisca murders were strictly local, targeting Josiah Moore due to a deep-seated financial or personal animosity. Josiah Moore, while respected, was known to have contentious relationships rooted in his business dealings. The prime suspect in this line of inquiry was Frank F. Jones, a local businessman, politician, and rival hardware merchant. Jones reportedly held a significant and escalating grudge against Moore. The supporting argument is the precise knowledge required to carry out the crime. If the perpetrator was a local, they would know the Moore family's routines, when the Stillinger girls were sleeping over, and the general layout of the property, allowing for a covert entry and exit. The use of the family's own axe suggests an impromptu opportunity or a deliberate attempt to frame the crime as an internal matter, though the overall staging contradicts a panicked internal act. The major conundrum remains the sheer number of victims. If the intent was solely to punish Josiah Moore, why the extended, brutal elimination of his wife, children, and two innocent guests? One hypothesis offered by investigators suggests that the local attacker may have lost control, or that the initial encounter with Sarah Moore necessitated the elimination of all potential witnesses. Furthermore, private investigators hired later focused heavily on the theory that Jones, though not the physical killer, may have hired the itinerant William Mansfield. Theory 1: to commit the murder as a contract hit. The lasting oddity of this theory is the silence. If a prominent local figure was responsible, the weight of such a secret in a small town should have cracked eventually. The fact that the local motive remains entirely unproven and circumstantial has protected the alleged conspirators for over a century. Theory 3: The ritualistic preacher. A third, more disturbing theory centers on the actions and later confessions of Reverend George Kelly, an itinerant preacher who had conducted a service in Villisca the same evening of the murders. Kelly was a troubled figure, known for his erratic behavior and history of mental instability and voyeurism. Kelly became a primary suspect years later after he began writing detailed, self-incriminating letters to authorities. He claimed to have heard voices urging him to slay utterly, suggesting the murders were a ritualistic act driven by religious mania or psychosis. Supporting this theory is Kelly's presence in Villisca that night and his uncanny, specific knowledge of certain details of the crime scene, details which were not widely publicized. This includes his description of the placement of the kerosene lamp and the manner in which the Stillinger girls' bodies were positioned. His mental state could also explain the ritualistic staging, the covered mirrors, which some criminologists link to attempts by disturbed individuals to avoid viewing themselves or the victims. The significant difficulty with Kelly was his unreliability. While he confessed, his testimony was often contradictory, rambling, and at times, clearly influenced by media accounts. He was prosecuted, with Frank F. Jones, Theory 2 figure, playing a role in funding the defense, a bizarre overlap that fuels speculation even now. Kelly was ultimately acquitted after 2 separate trials, with juries deciding his instability rendered his confession legally unsound. The oddity of the Reverend Kelly is the way his personal demons seem to align so perfectly with the unsettling staging of the crime. Even if he was not the physical killer, his presence and subsequent claims cemented the feeling that a terrifying, unholy ritual had taken place inside the Moore house. Case status plus call to action. The Villisca Axe murders remain unsolved. Although the historical investigation faltered and the case is officially cold, the intense scrutiny from researchers, historians, and the surviving family descendants continues. Modern techniques, such as DNA analysis, have been attempted, but the extreme contamination of the crime scene in 1912 meant that no reliable, verifiable physical evidence linking a suspect to the victims was ever recovered. The Moore house itself stands today, not merely as a historical relic, but as a perpetual monument to the 8 lives lost and the central question of American history it represents: what happens when the evil you fear is unrecognizable, fleeting, and utterly unknowable? The enduring nature of this case lies in its complexity. Do you believe the key to the Villisca mystery lies in the patterns of a traveling killer, the quiet venom of a local rivalry, or the deranged ritual of a tormented soul? What meaning do you draw from the strange act of covering the mirrors and draping the windows? Share your respectful thoughts, historical insights, and theories below. In these oldest, coldest cases, sometimes the truth only surfaces when fresh eyes examine the historical record. In memory of Josiah B. Moore, Sarah Moore, Herman Moore, Catherine Moore, Boyd Moore, Paul Moore, Lena Stillinger, and Ina Stillinger, 8 lives stolen in the dark, still waiting for the dawn of justice.